we can accomplish so much together, even in the small portion that we give, not being rich or something like that. But it changes our hearts as well. And so if we shirk off that responsibility just to people who have more, we're missing out on something that God wants to do and to grow in us.
We tend to kind of put the kind of the terms on God a little bit through our finances. God may be calling us to get a little bit uncomfortable.
Hey guys, we're talking about Brian Thompson's assassination today. He was the CEO of the United Healthcare, and just some interesting conversation there, what that might mean for us culturally as we talk about generosity and giving. I've got Cameron Ettinger with me. I'm Pastor Eddie, the youth pastor here at Christ Wesleyan. Let's jump into the conversation.
Yeah. This is our CBC Now podcast where we're talking about what's happening in our world and how we as a church respond to those things. So we're not pretending to have all the answers always, but I think it's good just to have conversations about these things, just because I think sometimes the church shies away from controversial conversations. So let's get right into it. So you kind of kicked us off with this United Healthcare assassination. So Brian Thompson, the CEO, he was just assassinated at the time when we were recording this. That had just happened, 2 days ago?
Yeah.
Something like that?
Yep.
Yeah.
It feels kind of like we're living in a movie right now.
Yeah, because there's a manhunt. The killer's still at large, right?
Yeah. And it's wild, and there's like pictures of the potential would-be assassin, and like one picture, it looks like someone's wearing one jacket, and then there's another, like they're saying, oh, it was a professional assassin. And then like shortly after, there's a picture of another guy that appears like he could be in a different jacket, and he's pulling down his mask. That doesn't seem like a very
smart thing to do.
Professionally assassin thing to do.
Yeah.
I heard about one of them going to a coffee shop and or potentially the guy they think shot him, and then they found his cup. I don't know how that happened, but
that's weird.
So DNA. Yeah.
I think there's just rumors that can fly all the time with stuff like this when it's an evolving
But he
story.
had a silencer. Yeah, he had a silencer,
Wow.
and then his shell casings had defend, deny, depose. I think that's what it was. Yeah,
defend, deny, defend, depose. Yeah. Why? What could that possibly mean?
Well, there's a little bit of thought. I don't think anyone knows for sure until we find out who the killer is. But there's a common phrase that was deny, defend, and something else.
Yeah.
There was a book that was out.
Okay.
And so that book was written about how insurance companies can take the side of greed. I mean, really, they are a for-profit organization, although they're supposed to benefit us. But the only way that they make money is by collecting enough insurance money and paying out less than they collect.
Okay.
Overall.
That makes
right.
Yeah, of course. I guess that makes sense if you're going to be a company that way.
So,
but yeah.
It's hard because on the other side, then that means they have to deny some claims.
Right.
And
it's healthcare.
Right. And where that balance is can get really murky. And what it looks like here is that you have someone with questionable morals because they were also undergoing an investigation because they knew that the Department of Justice was going to be investigating them, and a lot of the top CEOs or a lot of the top people sold a collective like $100 million in stock in a couple weeks before the investigation that they knew was coming.
Interesting.
So it kind of defrauded their stockholders that were there.
Yeah.
And you've got people that are already upset about
allegedly,
right?
Yeah.
And so they for sure sold before. The investigation is not over yet.
Yeah.
So they're still looking into
what's going on there. So potentially this assassin was motivated by the greed, or maybe was on like the receiving end of some of the negativity of that company. Like maybe they were denied or something like that at some point, or some we don't know. It's all speculation, I guess.
Yeah, and it's brought in a really interesting continued conversation, I feel like, in our culture with capitalism and lots of stuff that we're not going to get into in terms of those things today. But where, kind of a reflection of where are we as a country when it comes to greed, when it comes to how we spend our money, when it comes to if we're in a more giving station of society or giving culture, or more of a greed, like we're going to take and collect and keep as much as we possibly can. And so that led us to some really interesting research last week. And Cameron did the lion's share of that research, found some really interesting stuff that we want to talk about today.
Let's dive into it because I'm excited because I'll be honest, when I started this, I was kind of going in with a little bit of an assumption here that like just looking at where things are at in our economy right now and how things feel like they've been trending for a long time here, my assumption was like giving it has to be on some sort of a downward trend with it, right? Like if people are struggling more financially now because our economy is not great, then surely giving is also going down. So I kind of was posing this question, are we as a country, as a culture, becoming less generous as the years go by? And that was kind of my original question that kind of drove me to research some things. And the answer is kind of inconclusive.
Right.
That was probably the biggest shocker to me because I would have naturally just assumed yes, 100%. I mean, I'm even thinking about it just even being like on staff here. I think there's a little bit of some worry sometimes as like the economy goes bad that you're just like, man, is the church going to be okay?
Right.
Like are people going to
our
keep
livelihoods
giving?
depend on people's generosity.
Right.
Yeah.
But it was inconclusive, and there's a lot of reasons for that. So I feel like we should just kind of jump into some of it here.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, like, in general, how nonprofits and how charities and charitable giving work for a second.
Sure.
So most nonprofit organizations, according to the research that I did, are looking for donors who are going to be giving large donations one time versus engaged common people, you and me kinds of donors who are going to be giving regularly.
Yeah.
And the thought process is if we can get all of our needs met with the little bit of effort that it takes to convince maybe one very rich person to give to our cause, then why do I need to put a whole lot of effort in moving a lot of people just a little bit?
Right.
But the result is that sometimes the people who are moving the needle in generosity are the people who are at the top of the income ladder and maybe not the most engaged in the communities that they are giving to.
Yeah, and there's multiple reasons to give, right? There's because you believe in a cause that's happening, or like you can see the effect, or you believe in an organization and you trust them with those finances. But then there's also, you get into the large donor givers, like a lot of times that can be a financial move to lower themselves a tax bracket. So they can put their money to use in a nonprofit and not necessarily give all that money to the government.
It is. Yeah, that is one motivating factor. It is kind of interesting to me that you bring that up about like the tax incentive for charitable giving, because the first thing we have to get out of the way in terms of all this research and all the data that any of these organizations can collect is the only way they can track this is based upon either one, like what people report about themselves, or two, what they're able to access from like income tax returns, that kind of thing, what people are reporting there. And there's lots of ways that people give and are generous that aren't things that you can track on an income tax form. One article I read talked about this idea of like, if I decide to give someone, I know how to play guitar and I teach someone how to play guitar and you do a lot of time teaching them guitar and at the end of it I gift them my old guitar. That's a form of generosity that has no financial stuff to it and no paper trail behind it beyond the time that I spent with that person. Yet it could have some sort of monetary value attached to it based upon how much maybe the going rate for someone getting some music tutoring would go, that kind of thing. But it's a form that we can't track in here. So that can kind of skew the reporting about like how many people are generous still. Yeah,
or even unless they get something from the church itself. I think for a large majority of my life, like I didn't make enough for, like I was in the bottom tax bracket. So my charitable giving didn't lower my taxes at all. And so they were just, and I was doing them on TurboTax and I didn't have a tax accountant. I didn't know what I was doing. And so for lots of years, I didn't report any of those things.
And a lot of people have taken the attitude, by the way, as like some of our tax code has changed over time. Why bother?
Yeah.
If you're within a certain income range, like it may not actually make a difference for you. So they don't actually report anything, which again skews the statistics towards the higher income givers being more generous and the lower income ones not doing anything at all but that's maybe not what actually is happening because they're just not reporting it.
Yeah, and there's lots of different fields, so this is not just churches.
Correct. This is all generosity.
Yeah, like my sister used to work for a type 1 diabetes foundation, and like that would be a nonprofit, and they had big galas where they were trying to get the big dollar donors to come in and to give, millions of dollars in order to support type 1 diabetes research.
Yeah, that's crazy. Let's get into some of the numbers here.
Yeah, I was shocked by one, and it was just in terms of how the United States fared in comparison to other countries that are out there. And the graph really shocked me as we were looking at it. And this is something that one of the pieces of research that you found out of the Philanthropy Roundtable.
Yep.
And so this is back from 2014, but they showed also two different timelines. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
Right here. This is the per capita giving.
Per capita giving and where we're at kind of now total giving.
Right.
As a percent of like, I think that's like adjusted for inflation.
Yes.
So, so I think that starting graph that they put in their report is to basically make the case, like since the beginning of when they started measuring this, which was in 1962, this organization, we've basically increased proportional to inflation and all of that around 7 times the amount that we've given.
Wow.
Like when they did this in 2015 versus when they started recording it in 1962. Even if you make adjustments for different factors like income level and percentage of income, that kind of thing, it's still 3 times.
Yeah.
We're 3 times more generous than we were in 1960.
Right. Yeah, and that's super interesting. There was someone we were talking to as we were going through it was talking about, okay, well, is that the culture coming out of post-war where people are still trying to, gather up, and you have more of a mindset of saving, of buying things that last, as opposed to we now have dispensable income and can buy more disposable products, or what exactly those factors are to play. And then I was also shocked to learn how much the United States gives to other parts of the world.
Yeah. So this is a fascinating one because I did cross-check this with another piece of research that I did. And one of the things that I found really interesting, like if you look at that graph, the United States is the leader by like a lot.
A lot.
Like we are out giving the other nations of the world and giving to foreign causes.
Here it is right here. Yeah.
There it is. It's it's not even close.
The second highest giving of donations overseas, and this is not from a federal level. This is from private donations overseas outside of the country. The second highest was the UK at 4.9 billion. And we're at 43.9 billion as of 2014.
Yep. Yeah.
And so
that's
10 times.
Huge. Yeah. It's a huge amount. And I think we can park here for a second. Do you have any like theories as to why that is? I'm just curious what your thoughts would be on that.
If I had to guess, like purely from a pastoral standpoint, is that we have we are a majority Christian nation in terms of like active faith users, and so I would think,
you'd want to think that.
It's complicated. I want to think that, right? Because there are a lot of overseas work, missions work, things like that we do. Even when we have people outside of the Christian realm, like I think of like Mr. Beast or someone like that, he often will go overseas and partner with Christian organizations, though he is not a Christian himself.
Just because they're there and
because they're there and they're working in that area.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of people on the ground. I've seen people working in like the Kensington area or in areas in like downtown, like in Brazil, like where there's areas of drug addiction and homelessness and things like that are there. They're all like Christian organizations that are on the ground that we partner with stateside from over here. But I think also we have a little bit more of a culture of a willingness to spend money, period.
Yeah.
No,
well, and I think that kind of comes back to like America's just overall prosperity too. Like we have more disposable income, just I don't have any actual numbers for this, but just for living in America, like you're in like one of the top percentage brackets for just income that people have globally, just because you live here, know. And I know that can be hard to think about, especially in days and times kind of like these where the economy is harder and like it just seems so hard just to get by sometimes, like we're struggling. And yet like, you look at those statistics and are just like, man, like I'm so fortunate just to be here.
And it's this weird parallel because we have people that are struggling to survive while also a large majority of our social media platforms, they move towards like, okay, someone goes live. We literally buy coins or load our accounts with money to give money or coins or stars or galaxies or whatever to people on live broadcasts just to like say hey or to get our comment noticed or,
Yeah.
It's
man, what a silly way to spend money.
Right?
I know. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's out there.
Yeah, it is wild to me. One of the things I found wild about this stat about America being one of the top givers is when I cross-checked this with another statistic, is that that amount that we're giving, we're the largest globally in terms of giving to foreign causes.
Yeah.
However, giving to foreign causes is a minority portion of where our money goes in America in charitable giving terms. What I mean to say is like, out of all the things that we give charitably to, like foreign organizations, foreign causes, all of that is very low. The majority of
it's
our
like 1%,
giving,
right?
Something like that. It's
you
very
mean federally.
Low. I'm talking just across
privately?
the board. Yeah,
okay,
yeah. So the amount that we give, like that small percentage of what we're giving to, like we're still overwhelmingly giving to our own domestic needs.
Yes.
And yet that is still as high as it is. So to me, that kind of speaks to, man, I guess maybe the whole presupposition I had about not being a generous giver is just totally off. Yeah. And maybe we are the most generous country out there.
We are generous. I think we are the most generous country. I think that's pretty clear. I would be interested to see like per capita or something like that. Because like what I'm seeing here, I just added up, let's see, there's the six other countries underneath us. That's all of their giving overseas only adds up to 14.6 billion.
Yeah.
And so we're still like 3 times higher than all of them combined, the 6 that are beneath us. I wonder how many, if this list extended, I wonder how many countries we would have to add up before equaling what we give just overseas. Mm-hmm. Now, I think it's interesting because I do think our generosity goes to other places, even things like YouTube Live or TikTok streaming or something like that. I think we've moved away from a trust of institutions for sure. I think we're seeing that culturally. Mm-hmm.
And with reason too, because exactly I think you don't have to look hard to find a story about like so-and-so is caught in some sort of embezzling scheme, or some corporation is doing this thing, or some organization that was supposed to be doing nonprofit work is actually lining their own wallets.
I mean, we live in small town Pennsylvania, and we've had it happen locally multiple times over the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Where we get these stories that come out.
Which that was one of the things that was brought out in this Vox article that I read, this idea of that we're at an all-time low in terms of the polled percentage of people who have trust in institutions. And that includes, by the way, like just nonprofits across the board.
Right.
That's not just like, corporations that manage some sort of fund or something like that. Like this is nonprofit causes.
Yeah. And
there could be some reasoning for that. Like the one study that I looked at talked about how much of our GDP is now going through nonprofit causes. And like, if you look at that, like back, I think in 1993 or something like that, nonprofits had a bigger share of that than like our defense spending did.
Wow.
Which is insane, right? Like, and there's been a steady increase of nonprofits, like the amount of them popping up and doing kinds of work. So there's all kinds of nonprofits that you can give to. But just because there's more of them doesn't necessarily mean that we're better equipped to give.
That's true.
And just because there's more of them, I think it kind of creates a lot of noise that people have to sift through and really research. Which ones are the good ones? Who's going to actually manage my money the best way and steward it towards a certain cause? Who's going to actually, when I give this money, is it actually going to impact the cause that this nonprofit says it stands for? Is it just going to be whatever,
Well, I was looking at something recently too, because you were saying just because we have more, also it doesn't mean that the problems are getting solved, right? Like you think about the homelessness epidemic that's there. Someone read a stat for me recently, and it was talking about the homeless problem in New York. And they had given so many billions of dollars to solve this homelessness problem that equaled about $66,000 per homeless person. And so it was like they were interviewing a homeless person on the street, and he's like, "Where is it?" Like, where did that go?
It certainly wasn't in their hands, probably.
Like, Nor do I think we should just hand that seems like a dangerous thing too.
It's interesting too, because I remember I read this NPR article about a guy who was saying like he made it a regular habit of himself to whenever he saw a homeless person, he just would have a $20 bill ready and he would hand out, and he would do that. That was just like, and that was his charity. He never recorded it. He never, kept meticulous records of it. He's just like, this is the kind of person I am. And when I see it, the money's going here. Because of the economy and the way that we are right now, he's like, I don't have the ability to do that anymore.
Right.
I can't just carry $20 bills on me to do that. I need every ounce I have. So I kind of want to like settle here for a second, because I know we've kind of glazed past it with some of these statistics, but I do think it's worth talking about. It's like, how much should we let economic factors dictate our giving?
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think it has a play in the conversation, because it changes things. It changes the dynamic of our families. But I also think one of the most beautiful things about giving for me is not necessarily, and I think we see I think it's 2 Corinthians 9:7, like God wants us to give out of a cheerful heart, right? And so we're big at our church about not giving out of guilt or something like that. That's why we don't even pass the plates at our church, right? Like we have boxes that are on the walls on the outside so that you give out of a cheerful heart and not out of like, okay, well, everyone's going to be looking at me as I'm passing this plate. But for me, one of the things that giving has taught me to do is to steward well with what God has entrusted me with. And so when the economy starts to turn, it just may be another reflection of, hey, I need to be careful about where I'm spending my money. You know? I was just telling Cameron before the cameras came on, and my sister, I don't think would mind me sharing this. She looked at her Starbucks bill over the last year, and it was almost $7,000 at Starbucks. Which is, I mean, makes sense given how
expensive Starbucks is. Yes,
and she's a multiple day or multiple times a day frequenter of that. And so, like those kind of things, or like now there's whole platforms like Rocket Money or something like that that's being built on finding people's recurring subscriptions that are out there. So, like there are usually lots of pieces of fat that can be trimmed off. And
are you taking that step to do that, or are you just scapegoating the fact that the economy is bad and that's dictating your giving?
I find that when my tithe is good, I spend the rest of my money more wisely. There are lots of people, great, wonderful people that I know that make double, triple the one that I'm thinking of. Her and her husband combined make probably 4 or 5 times as much as my family does. And yet I feel like we live life so much more than they do. They're constantly concerned about money because they have this different, they have a maid and someone who mows their property and, someone that comes in and tutors their child. And they've filled the means with what they live so much more. But tithing isn't a piece of that, and so they're not constantly reflecting on like, how am I using the money that God has entrusted me with in something that is more lasting than the temporal.
I've heard stories over and over again of people who are just like, I don't know how I'm going to do it this month. Like it doesn't make sense. The checkbook's not balancing. It's all those things. And yet when it comes time for them to give their tithe or their offering, whatever they had planned to do, it's there.
Right.
Like they can't explain it. They just look at that bank account number and it's there.
Man, like I call that God math. Like there is something to that. Like I can remember, so to get a little like personal in it, like there was a time when Yana and I first got married. My wife is a legal immigrant from Thailand. She came over here to marry me, which was awesome. We met over in Thailand on a missions trip, dated for a few years. It was awesome. And when she came over, I had to waive all of my rights to any sort of social care.
Interesting.
And so I had to give up food stamps. I had to give up SNAP cards and food banks, like anything that would be a social net.
Kinds of those like assistance programs.
Yep. Any of those assistance programs I had to waive.
Wow.
And I was dirt poor. Like we financed our own wedding and then honeymoon. And when we came back from my honeymoon, we had $0 in the bank, $0 in our savings. And I still had like $7,000 on a credit card and a car payment. And like we tithe. I was working at a warehouse when we first got married, and then the lead pastor of a church said, "Hey, I've been telling you a job's coming. A job's here. I wanted to offer it to you." And I said, "Absolutely, I'll take it." And so I wrote a letter immediately. It was like, "Hey, I'm quitting my job. I'm becoming a middle school youth pastor." And then he wrote me back and said, "We're going to start part-time for the first 6 months."
Oh no.
And I went, "Oh no."
Yeah.
And so I worked through that, and there were times where we kept our tithe, but I would have conversations with Yana going, "I don't know if our car is going to be there tomorrow."
Yeah.
Right? Like,
that's nuts.
If our car disappears, it's not because it was stolen, it's because the bank came and took it. And so we were juggling those things, but also going, this is what God's called us to give. We're just trying to live within those means as much as possible. And it worked. And that's the God math part. Yeah. I don't know how. We paid off the car. We paid off my credit card eventually. Like it was just, we did a whole lot with a whole little.
Yeah. And like, to be clear too, we're not saying like, hey, like give and God's going to take care of it.
That's
like,
right.
Like, cause I think that is a misconception that is out there too. I think sometimes, I think the general theme here though is like, I think God is calling us out of our comfortability.
Yes.
I think sometimes with our finances, we can express a lot of like earthly fear over our lives because our finances happens to be just that thing that we can control. We can dictate how we manage our money and how that can affect our lives is huge, obviously. So I think we tend to kind of put the kind of the terms on God a little bit through our finances.
Yeah.
God may be calling us to get a little bit uncomfortable, and like, when you're in that place of giving to a place where it's uncomfortable, you're going to have some legitimate fear about your ability to do things like put food on the table maybe, or, that there's the pay the bills, all of it.
Right.
And I think like we can't have that kind of fear. We've got to trust in God to be the source of our joy and our hope, no matter the situation. I think it's easy to do if we have the numbers all worked out in our finances. Yeah. It's a lot harder if you're not sure.
And it's so interesting because I think tithing teaches that dependence on God as well. And there's so much of our fear and anxiety. I mean, we see this in Matthew 5-6, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, where he's talking about like, don't be worried about tomorrow. Like, the birds of the air, they're not worried about what what food is coming. The flowers of the field, they're not worried about what they're going to dress like. Like God takes care of them. How much more is he going to take care of you in the midst of all of this? And it's when we can surrender that worry over and really entrust God with it that fear and anxiety subsides.
Yeah. That's great.
And so being able to like go with tithing, I echo exactly what you're saying. This is not the prosperity gospel, right? But I in that God math somewhere, I think like there has to be a priority shift. And I think that's where the God math starts to work out is like, this is the main thing. I'm so thankful for what God has given me. I will, like, this is his, I'm just returning back what is his, and I want to use faithfully with what he's given me in the remaining. And as you're conscious of how that money's being used, it works out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where we started the podcast, we were talking about this assassination that was largely maybe, well, we don't know, but could have been motivated by at least some point of like financial inequality. And like, we've got this, maybe a greedy CEO and a person who is envious of that wealth or maybe hurt by it. We don't know, but there is, I think,
could have had someone who was hurt by a refusal of a claim or something like that, which would be perceived as, oh, you're getting wealthy off the death of my wife, or
right. We don't know.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, I do think this sentiment is more in our culture right now, where we have a lot of angst maybe in our culture that's directed towards like wealthier people. And I do think some of that is like the economy driving it. I just do. And I do think, there's this general attitude of like, there's no way you could have made it to the top of our ladder economically unless you got your hands dirty somewhere, kind of situation.
You stepped on someone's back.
Right. And it's kind of interesting because in the middle of me doing this research for the generosity stuff, I was like, okay, well, let's kind of examine this side of it too. And the first thing to note is there is some worrying signs about how we're giving generously and maybe being on the downside because the average you and me kind of giver is going down, and nonprofits are beginning to worry. Can we pay the bills? And so the statistic I have here is fewer Americans are donating to nonprofits than they used to. That's the amount of donors. And it's also declining once you take inflation to an account, which is a even more sobering thing considering that inflation has been doing. The other thing is that giving is going down in the younger generations. Millennials and Gen Z in particular are giving less comparatively to older generations. And the perception of that group of people, who are also in that group of people who have declined the amount of giving that they've done over the past few years, over 50% of them cited this same kind of like angst towards richer people. And the idea is, well, richer people should give more. I don't have to give because richer people should give more.
Right.
I think that's kind of sad.
Yeah.
I mean, let's take the factors out of that picture for a second. Like, I don't care how the person got their wealth. Maybe for the purposes of this conversation, we can debate about that in an entirely separate way. Like, that shouldn't be the response. Like, we shouldn't be shirking off our responsibility to one another just because someone else might have a greater capacity to do so. That's sad to me a little bit. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we see that scripturally, like the story of the widow that gives the 2 cents. Like, there's something about the heart of giving, like are lights going to stay on at the church from 2 pennies? Not for very long.
Yeah.
Right? Or like, can you buy a meal even with something like that? No, but giving is twofold in that it does help. Like, we can accomplish so much together, even in the small portion that we give, not being rich or something like that, but it changes our hearts as well. And so if we shirk off that responsibility just to people who have more, we're missing out on something that God wants to do and to grow in us. There's something incredibly beautiful when we hear stories of people who give. And I think, for a large while there, I don't know if maybe this to be true or not true, but that the most generous people tend to be, or at least appeared to tend to be, people who have not, right? Like, when you think of, maybe this is not true of donating to a nonprofit or something like that, but like, if you talk to a waiter or waitress, like, the people who tip larger tend to be the people who appreciate hard work, or labor or something like that. I mean, if you think about just in terms of tipping and being a waiter or waitress, like, every single action that we make builds the people that we become. you know? And so when you go through life living generously, we grow into more generous, likable people. Like, no one just wakes up one day and is like, you know what? I want to be old man geezer at the end of the road that just complains about everything and is super bitter.
Yeah.
Like, that's no one's life goal.
Sure.
But how do those people get there? It's through a series of hurts and responses and small choices that are made every single day, and living a lifestyle of generosity, even if it's with a small amount, changes us into a people that I think are more reflective of God's character.
Yeah. You know, to me, kind of in that same vein, I look at like the attitude of someone who gets to that old man geezer at the end of the thing, you know, like they develop an attitude like that because of this feeling that they're owed something, you know. And I think if we're constantly waiting to get what we're owed, like we're going to constantly be in that place of complaining.
Absolutely.
And I mean, we as Christians know like what we're actually owed versus what Christ promises us as a result of his sacrifice for us. Like the scales are not balanced.
Right.
And that should be an overwhelming thought when we start looking outwardly, you know, to the inequalities in our world. You know, I think about that, like, you know, why are we so consumed by this like ever upward or maybe downward? I don't know how you want to look at it, but this ever upward or downward struggle about how much we have versus what other people have.
Right.
And I think, you know, this is maybe my own personal diagnosis because I'm a millennial and I'll do this myself, you know, aiming at millennials. But like, I think a lot of us have this attitude of like, well, how could we be considered in this like greedy category, right? Yeah. We don't have the things that our parents had when they were our age. We don't have massive bank accounts. We don't have all this stuff. We don't have all these very tangible signs of wealth that a lot of people have. But yet we are throwing away our money on other things that maybe don't look like you know, tangible kinds of things that we're like, you know, we don't maybe have like the Mercedes-Benz parked in the driveway for everyone to see, but we do have like a pile of subscriptions that we're paying for over and over and over again. Or we're taking trips and having these experiences, you know, we're really prioritizing that kind of thing all the time. Right. You know, just because what we are chasing with our money isn't the same as what our parents' generation was chasing doesn't make us any less greedy. Right. So I just think we have to evaluate that because no one wants that in their face being like, you're the actual greedy one. You know, I know that's hard, but like it takes me back to what you said about like, you know, how much are you actually like examining things? And and yes, I mean that on like looking at your checkbook or your bank account, whatever you want to call it, you know, actually making sure checkbook. Gosh, I'm so dated.
I've never actually filled out the back of my checkbook.
No?
No. I tried to do it once, but
all right, I'll just say your apps. There we go.
There you go.
You pull up your bank app. There you go. Anyway, just, I don't know. I think we're not examining things on that way.
Oh, I totally agree.
But we're also not taking inventory of like our spiritual motivations in the middle of that too, which is sad to me. Like, you know, we should be better about that as a church, but money seems to be one of those like things we just can't talk about.
Yeah. And I do think, I think we'll see the church start to respond to that a little bit more. Just as we go, whoa, trust us with every part of your money. And then we're like, not really clear on how that money's being spent. I'm thankful to be at our church where, man, there's just so much that we have our hands in the community, in the world, and all of those places. And there are conversations behind the scenes that are always like, okay, well, is this really necessary? Is this, you know, what we should do? Is this not what we should do? But I think we will tend to trend, I think, more into the future. And this is not an announcement or anything, but I think that we'll trend more in the future of going, hey, we're looking to raise this money for this particular project so that people have a clear sight of where their money's going. Because I think that we see that a little bit in what's happening, especially when it comes to like donating to local community aid. Like if I donate to a food bank, I know that money is going to that food and it's coming back rather than sending it out into the
some organization
atmosphere, and then you're like, funny. I don't know what happens with it.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that you bring that up, because this is one of the encouraging things to me from the data I looked at, which is that universally, the generosity metrics that we've been looking at this whole time, they go up in times of need, in times of financial insecurity, across the board. Doesn't matter if you are a person who is like the stereotype of a good giver. I know we talk about this a lot. We've kind of hinted to it a lot. Is that a religious person tends to be a better giver. They kind of go through that
statistically
too.
Statistically
are better givers. They talk about that in the statistics that I read. But also one of the things they point to are the people who are more, just generally speaking, connected to their community are also in that category, religious or not.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the tie here seems to be, or the key thing in that seems to be, is connectedness. And so. And they bring out this idea that when we are in financial hard times, the needs are more apparent, and therefore our connectedness goes up, and people give more. They talked, this downward trend I've been talking about in the number of givers blipped up in 2020 with the pandemic, because the needs were more apparent.
Right.
So it's been the only significant blip in this steadily downward trend.
Wow.
Because the needs were transparent. So I think if the church could utilize that kind of like moment where there are hard times going on there, and be like, there is probably an impulse that you have to want to take care of someone around you when their needs are transparent to you. But it goes so much more than just taking care of them when the times are hard and you can see the needs, because needs are everywhere and you might not see them.
Well, that's what I'm thinking about too, like from the pastoral side as well, hearing people talk about like, oh, I just don't feel connected to this church. I wonder, and I don't know this because our pastors actually don't have access to look at anyone's financial records. But I wonder if there's a tie between a lack of giving and a lack of feeling connected.
I wonder that too. Yeah. Like you're not, like the idea being like, no one depends upon you, but there's also no one there for you if you would need it. Yeah.
And like because I think about some of the things that I've given to, like even beyond the church, like I think that helps me feel like I'm a part of things. But I think of like just random things. Okay, the Bible Project. When the Bible Project was getting started on YouTube, I was like, yo, there's nothing like this out there, and we didn't have a lot back then. But I was like, hey, $10 a month, like I'll be a part of this. And like they sent me something in the mail, and like I got email updates, and I was like, wow, yeah, they're coming out with this new video. They're doing they're doing a video on every single. Can you imagine if a book of the Bible was able to be broken down on video, every single book, like, and I was connected to that in a way where once the 66 books were finished, I was like, okay, I'm going to stop my donation now, because now it's done. The project I was donating for was done.
But they kept going.
They kept going with other things, but I am not as connected now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, and so I wonder if a way to increase connectedness in the church would be for on the church's side to go, hey, here are the clear needs that you can give for, but then also on the parishioner side of saying, where in my finances right now, maybe can I give a little bit more to be a part of this? Even if you're not $1 million donor or, whatever.
And it also makes me think too, when it comes to like interpersonally with our brothers and sisters in Christ, like I think particularly in American culture, there is a certain stigma about being in need financially.
Yeah.
And so you don't present yourself as struggling even if you really are because of that stigma. And I think if we could be more transparent, about our struggles that way, that we would see needs around, within our fellow believers that we could take care of more too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot there, like culturally, that I think that we need to work through, because I think we need to be more open and honest about it. And then on the other side too, like being willing to like undergo help other than just a handout, because there's so many people that I know inside the church and outside the church that struggle financially, and it's hard for them. Every month is hard for them. but they got 12 cats. You know what I mean? Like, and you're like, cats, cool. But like your bill for your cat is more than you.
Yeah.
Like,
yep.
And so to come alongside them and be like, hey, let's find these guys a loving home so that you can take care of yourself. Like, let's get you to a better position. Yeah. The problem is complex.
There's no easy solutions, but I think we kind of itched at something.
Yeah, I think so too.
As we're kind of like wrapping up here, I think it is fair to talk about how we talk about giving at our church locally.
Yeah.
More than just kind of like this wider problem of, are we generous or whatnot? Because we have at our church these 4 Gs that we think represent our values, who we are as believers as a church and what we expect everyone at our church to be. Gather, grow, give, go. Give is one of those 4 things, and we define giving not just as a financial thing. It goes far beyond that. We use this phrase, time, talents, and treasures.
Yes. And an emphasis that we talked about recently is time, talents, and treasures.
Yes.
And
not or.
Yeah, it's not an or, right? So it's not like, oh, I will not give my money and I'll give my time or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important. Like, Jesus speaks about money pretty often.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it wasn't something that he shied away from. And I think that there is something to that. I think it's the money part's important, but then the time and talent parts are also important.
Which I kind of break down time and talents this way, where like talents are the things that you're just good at and able to do.
Yeah.
Like either God has gifted you with the ability to do it, or like over time you've acquired a skill in a certain area and you can use that skill to benefit the church. Yep. That's talents. Time is like, it doesn't matter if you're gifted in something or not. Just someone needs to do it, and it needs to happen. We need a
warm body.
Yes. It's like, can you give your time just to do it? I think some people kind of take this attitude of like, oh, well, that's not really my thing. Or like, I don't think I would be good at that. Like maybe we're not asking that.
Yep.
Maybe we just need people to get things done.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a brain hack that I use for myself, which is I can do anything for a minute. Right. And if I can do it for a minute, I can do it for 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
If I can do it for 5 minutes, I can do it for 10. If I can do it for 10, I can do it for an hour. Right. Now, it falls apart as with everything, every metaphor. If you take it too far, I can't lift the same weight repetitively for an hour. Right. But I can do something uncomfortable. Like, do I want to go spread mulch for an hour? No. Right. But can I do it for a minute? Yeah.
Yeah.
And can I do it for 5 minutes? Yeah.
And it's kind of funny. Like I think about it with, we on a yearly basis now we've been doing these food packing events here. Like I'd be willing to wager that a very small percentage of the people there are people who are like food service.
This is my
experts.
talent.
That are like, that is my talent. Very few of them are like that. But
so good at that.
For like the few hours that we're there doing that event, everyone is pitching in to do the food packing.
My 8-year-old comes in. I mean, she did it 2 years ago is the first time that we did it together as a family out at the Sunday farm.
Mm-hmm.
And she was 6 at the time, and she was just like the sticker machine. Like, we're just like, hey, you're going to be in charge of stickers.
Yeah.
And some went on upside down, and they're just going to have to deal with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important because when I was bringing up that statistic about like the richer people will just give, I think we can have that same attitude sometimes about the other parts of the time, talents, and treasures thing.
Yeah.
Like,
on now.
The people with more time can do that, or the people who are more talented can do that. Like if everyone had that attitude, nothing would get done.
Yeah.
And the reality is that there's a lot of needs that we could speak to as a church, and a lot of things that could happen if people were just willing.
Right. Yeah, and letting us know about the willingness. I mean, like, there's oftentimes where I'll have that reflection of there's got to be some, like, we got so many thousands of people inside of our church. Like, there's someone.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know to let us know that we need that need, and then we are not letting them know that we need that need.
Yeah, it kind of goes both ways. Like, I think we as a staff and
we're
pastors
trying to get
have
better.
To reflect that. Yeah, but I think that's I don't know. I just been thinking about that because I've heard that. I've been in that position, honestly, as a church employee, where you go to someone and you're asking them, hey, like, would you be willing to do this? And they're like, no, I don't think I would be good at that.
Right.
Or no, I don't have the time. Like, yeah.
Nobody said that.
But I do think, there's lots of ways that we could be giving back, and kind of like that connectedness piece.
Yeah.
Pastor Kyle has been working on this with Growth Track coming up, and I'm excited for that when that comes out.
Is it February when it's?
I think next year sometime, early next year. I think it's February. I'm not sure. It will be early next year. So Growth Track is a new thing we're rolling out that is just kind of pushing people through the process of getting involved.
It should make it so clear on how to get involved.
Yeah, but one of the things I love about Growth Track that he's been working on and pointing out is, like, if you are sitting there in our church and feeling disconnected. One of the ways that you actually can fix that problem is by serving, is by giving back of your time and your talents, because you're going to be doing that communally with other people. In the process of serving, you make a bond with other people. I think about our worship team. Like, on Sunday morning, that team is getting together before service and lifting up personal prayer requests for each other. They have an intimacy with each other just by nature of serving together. And I'm sure there's all kinds of people all across our church who have that similar.
I call that the camp effect. Like, we get some people that don't sign up for camp. We're like, why aren't you going to camp? I don't know anybody. It's like, and you won't. Like,
until you go. Yeah. Yeah.
You don't know anybody until you know them. I've never met someone that I had already known.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for watching this episode of CBC Now. I don't know if we closed the book on any conversation.
But we had a good conversation.
I feel like we opened a lot more things than we closed. A lot more questions and answers this time.
Let us know what you think down in the comments.
And if you've got any ideas for some future topics, we're trying to be responsive to things going on in our culture. And I know it kind of is a weird journey to go from assassination to generosity. But somehow we did that today.
I think that they're tied together.
I'm willing to wager. Yes. I'm not going to say for sure, but I'm willing to wager. But yeah, so make sure that you like, comment, subscribe. Make sure to check out. We're now on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. So we have lots of different podcasting platforms. Just check us out and make sure that you subscribe to stay up to date monthly. We're doing this monthly still.
All right.
So you got to be on the lookout too, because we got a special guest coming up.
Yeah.
Next.
Can we announce it yet?
I think we can now. I wasn't sure about last time, but I think we can now because they've been announcing it very low key. But we're gonna have Ruslan on. So Ruslan,
I'm excited. I'll be in Thailand.
Yeah.
That's where my wife's family's from, and so I was just telling my wife this morning if I could teleport back for this one day. I absolutely love Ruslan. He makes great content on his main channel, Ruslan KD, and on his second channel, Bless God Studios. Phenomenal influencer, I guess you could say, in the Christian and the secular world.
Not afraid of a little controversy, which is what I've appreciated about him. And he's going to be talking to us on a Sunday morning here at church about culture wars, which is so hot topic and so in brand for this.
It's going to be phenomenal.
It's going to be good. So yes.
So make sure you tune in for the podcast and also show up or watch online for the service because it's going to be phenomenal.
It's going to be great.
December 29th for that.
Yeah, December 29th. All right. Well, hey, thanks for joining us. We'll see you later.
See ya.